What is cracking, everybody? You're back with Mr. Berger. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at this new meta Minor Poison deck. Now this is a really interesting deck, because what they did here is they took that classic combination, the classic Minor Poison archetype, and they kind of made it into a splash deck. So really what happened here was there was this graveyard deck, this Splashyard deck that was really popular in the current meta. And this guy, IMJP, who has gotten to first in the world with this deck, saw the deck and he was like, alright, I guess that there's something that I could do to tweak it a little bit, and that is switch the graveyard out for a minor. And of course, you probably know this already, but this deck was covered recently by and on CWA, and this guy was playing his personal replay, so if you haven't checked out that video already, go ahead and give that a look. I'll make sure to link that in a card in the description below. But anyway, I wanted to cover the deck as well because I tried it out myself and I had a lot of fun with it. So I'm going to take some of the tips that I learned off of that video and then some of the tips that I learned from playing it as well. And, just kind of some common sense things that I would, come up with just from looking at the deck and how it's played overall, and share all of that with you guys. So this was played by IMJP. He did get to first in the world with this deck, and it's a deck that is a Splashyard deck that took the graveyard out and replaced it with a minor. So your new win condition now is that kind of minor or minor poison. You've got a lot of potential for chip damage on the towers with the minor poison, and you can also build up a big push and play really solid defense with all that splash damage that you have. So let's see. This particular version, like I said, is played a little bit differently. You do play it very defensively, just like you would with the graveyard version of this deck. But well, the major difference with this one is that it's more of like chip damage over time, and consistent little pushes over time with powerful defenses, then turning those defenses into counter pushes rather than one huge push. Because with the graveyard decks, you can kind of play defense and not do too much until you catch them off guard, and all of a sudden get one massive push with their graveyard, counter their counter with a poison, and their tower just absolutely melts. So this deck doesn't have as much potential to do that because you don't have the graveyard as your win condition, but it still works out really well. And it has huge defense potential. I mean, look, there's the Tombstone and the Tornado in there, and any deck that has both of those cards, it's a very heavy defensive deck, because both of those cards are generally played on defense. Now, the Tornado has a number of options, a number of roles here. One of them is, of course, defense, countering things like hogs, or in this case, Goblin Barrels. It does a great job of countering the Goblin Barrel. But another one, of course, is just pulling things together to synergize with all the splash damage that you have in this deck. And that allows you to shut down massive pushes with your Baby Dragon or your Ice Wizard, synergize with the Tornado, and then turn that counter push into a winning push for yourself, taking out a tower there. So you want to go for a strong defense with things like the Ice Wizard and the Baby Dragon, and maybe even the Barbarian Barrel, and even the Tornado, and then turn all that into counter push and use the minor as your win condition and as your mini tank. Minor, of course, can be used to counter things like pumps here. As you can see in this case, I decided to use the poison on that pump, which works out really well. It does a great job of pretty much fully shutting down a pump or making it like an equal elixir trade, and also getting some chip damage off on the tower. So let's see, what else did I want to talk about here? Oftentimes what you're going to do with this deck is you're going to go into sudden death. So you're not necessarily going to win this game, or these games rather, in single elixir time. Oftentimes you're going to play a solid hard defense, and then once you get into sudden death, you have a chance to build up a big push, and then tank with the minor and just absolutely destroy one of their towers. I know that kind of is counterintuitive to what I was saying earlier with all the chip damage, but regardless, it does have more potential to be more effective when you get into sudden death or into double elixir time, whatever you want to call it, because you just have this really big counter push potential. That's what you're going to be going for in that particular situation, if you can't manage to chip down their tower earlier on, depending on what the lineup is. That being said, let's talk about the Cannon Cart. Cannon Cart does a great job of being a huge kind of provider of your DPS. Cannon Cart, you can place it at the bridge. It works well with minor pushes. You can use it aggressively at the bridge to kind of you know, bait out whatever spell they might have and get a bunch of chip damage off onto their tower if it locks on. And if it does lock onto their tower, it does an insane amount of damage if they don't answer it. So you have that splash synergy again with the not only the Ice Wizard and this Baby Dragon and the Tornado, but also the Poison and the Barbarian Barrel. All those things can be used together because you can pull everything in the Tornado and allow your, you know, range units to splash them down and chip away at them all with your Poison and your Barbarian Barrel. And then, of course, you got the Tombstone, generally placed in the center like so, to counter heavier units as a defensive structure. So if you want to use your Tornado on offense to pull things into the opponent's tower and splash it all down, or just pull their whole wave down, you know, and you got the Tornadoes, you have the Tornado on offense, then you got the Tombstone, rather, to rely on for defense in that case. Alright, so I talked about the splash synergy, I talked about the role of the Tornado, I talked about how the cannon card is used. That's pretty much, I covered most of the things that I wanted to talk about in this deck, or for this deck rather, in this video. So there are a few more things that I wanted to cover here briefly, and that is, this deck, it's definitely an anti-meta deck. So this deck shines in the current meta because it goes up really well against other decks that are really popular right now. So as the meta shifts, this deck isn't necessarily going to be as powerful, and it is kind of a funky, unusual kind of deck. You know, it's not something that you generally see, because minor poison decks usually have more control. You'd have like an E-Wiz, and then maybe like an Inferno Dragon or something in there, or Inferno Tower. But this one, it feels like a Splashyard deck, because it is a Splashyard deck. So it was crafted to counter the current meta. It does really well against a lot of decks that are really popular right now. So it might not be so great in the future, but it's definitely really powerful for the time being. Now let's talk about opening moves. For opening moves, you can always use a Tombstone as an opener. That's a pretty solid opening move. Use it in the, you know, up 3 spots from your King Tower, down 4 spots from your from the river, and then, you know, what is it, 2 spots to the left of your right Princess Tower, or 2 spots to the right of your left Princess Tower. Nice solid safe spot for most defensive structures. If you haven't seen OJ's video on those, on the placement of those defensive structures, I definitely recommend checking that out. It's kind of an old video, but it's really helpful. Sometimes checking out those old interaction videos from, you know, OJ or even like Ernie or something like that can be really helpful and teach you some really cool things. So let's talk about what other opening moves we can do. We could cycle the Ice Wizard in the back. You guys know me. I like using my cycle cards generally in the back as an opener. I don't usually like hanging tight and seeing what they do. I like putting something on the board and trying to get the game rolling in most cases. But if you're one of those people that likes to hang tight and seeing what your opponent does, that's totally fine. And I think that would work out pretty well with this deck, because you do generally want to try to run out the timer and see if you can get it going into double elixir time. Alright, other than that, you could open with like a Barbarian Barrel at the bridge, because even though you won't get any damage with the roll itself, you do spawn 1 Barbarian, and they're forced to answer that. If they don't, it'll get a little bit of chip damage off on their tower, and either way, it'll get the game going, because they'll probably put something down to answer it, and then that'll kind of just, you know, get the ball rolling, get the game in motion. So that's pretty much what I think for opening moves. You can always minor the tower, but you generally want to save that minor for counter pushes and for absolutely last resort on defense if you need it. For card replacements, pretty much just splash synergistic things. So like for the Baby Dragon or the Ice Wizard, you could probably get like a Wizard or an Executioner. For the minor, you could do like a mini tank, you know, like the Knight or the Ice Golem or something like that would work well. For the cannon card, just another range support, like a Musketeer or something like that. For the Barbarian Barrel, of course, you could always do Log or Zap, maybe Snowball. For the Tombstone, maybe like a Goblin Hut or something, but that plays a little bit of a different role. Maybe like a defensive structure, like a cannon or a Inferno Tower or something like that. For poison, you could always go like Fireball or Arrows, but the minor poison thing works out really well. It's a classic kind of, you know, archetype and combo that works out great, and it's kind of like core in this deck. But if you don't have that, you could replace it with one of those 2 things. For Tornado, unfortunately, there's no real replacements. I would say, you know, another defensive structure like Tombstone, but you've already got Tombstone in the deck. And Tornado, you know, fits in really well with the splash theme of this deck, so you don't want to replace that if at all possible. Alright guys, that is it for this new meta minor poison deck. It's like a Splashyard deck without the graveyard in it, but instead you got that minor in there for your win condition. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a good night.